What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Dreams to Reality podcast. And as you can already see, we are in a complete different location. I think actually it might be one of my favorite and best setups so far. But I got a very, very special guest. And actually today is the first time, I think 18 kind of episodes in, I'm actually interviewing and podcasting with an author. And today, this special guest is Giles Watkins, who is now, first book of Positive Sleep. And before I really dive into this book, I would just want to introduce you to the podcast. Thank you for coming today. How's things, Giles?
Superb, Cameron. Great to see you, and great for me to be back in Bristol. I was at university here, and my economics department was literally across the road. The building site across the road has been turned into a WeWork or whatever for entrepreneurs. That was where I studied for 3 years. So to me, to come back here and do a podcast is especially special.
Wow. So where are you originally from?
From the New Forest, down in Hampshire, and came here for university in the mid-'80s and loved it. And then travelled, worked overseas a lot, worked with Shell and McKinsey particularly, a lot in Asia Pacific and London and around the UK. And the last few years I've been doing more freelance coaching, consulting work, and became increasingly interested in sleep.
So let's take it back just a little bit. Okay, so you've done 3 years here in Bristol, studying economics. What was the next step after that? What did you do?
Yeah, I went to work for Shell. And
like the petrol station, okay.
Training program. I always worked on the commercial side and did 3 years working as a salesperson up in Birmingham actually, and also working in London, and then became an oil trader. So that worked in London, doing lots of different contracts with different countries in Africa, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and also in Central Asia, Kazakhstan and places like that. And I got my first overseas posting to Vietnam in 1995. So I lived in Vietnam for 4 years, helped set up a business there for Shell.
Was that the first time living abroad?
That was my first time living abroad. I travelled a lot.
So how was it taking a transition from living in Bristol, living in London, living in Hampshire? How was the transition from the English culture to then moving over there to live?
Great question. It took me 18 months, I would think, to settle in. I think most people who go and live overseas have this wonderful first few weeks when it's all new and shiny, and then sort of reality of, well, it's some of the routine set in. Also the fact you're a long way from friends and family, and we didn't have internet in those days, so it was you faxed your friends and family, all that sort of stuff. My first Christmas away, I remember faxing my mum for a recipe of brandy butter and her faxing back, and then we couldn't get the ingredients, whatever, things like that. So yeah, that was quite tough. After about 18 months, I really began to settle in.
What pushed you to go there? Was it the money? Was it just the risk, just trying something new? What?
Yeah, it was a bunch of things. In Shell at that time, to progress definitely in terms of ambition in the organisation, it definitely was a good career move to go and work overseas. So that was something that was encouraged if you had general management aspirations. In addition to that, yes, you're well paid, I must admit. In those days, Vietnam was only about 5 years after Vietnam started to open up as an economy. So it was almost still regarded as quite a dangerous place to go, even though it wasn't particularly. And also, I did fancy a change. I fancied stretching myself. I'd done a lot of travelling the previous few years, as I said, to Africa and India and Pakistan in that regard.
Awesome. So you've done your 4 years there. You said the first 18 months were pretty challenging, but then did it start to feel a little bit like home?
Yeah. And you usually make friends, you get into a routine. I took up golf actually at that point, which was a great way for me to stop working, because I'd become a bit of a workaholic. Setting up a business in a challenging country, it's easy to sometimes think you've got to do everything yourself, and I think I fell into that trap a little bit. And yes, so the last 2.5 years, I really enjoyed myself, as well as the business did very well. So that was great.
And then what brought you back?
The role finished after 4 years. I mean, you're in a joint venture with a partner, and the Vietnamese partner has to sort of sign off each year. You have an expatriate because they're more expensive than local staff. So we found a very high quality Vietnamese guy to take the role, which was great. And then I moved back to London to do a job which I didn't particularly enjoy. I managed to get a posting to Paris for a year, which was great. I was still with Shell. I did some work in a sales and marketing role in London and Paris, and then into another role in London, which was a global role, which was a great a great time, which was more in learning and development, because I have this passion for coaching and learning and training, which I really enjoyed. That was great because it was a global role. I was able to travel around quite a bit. But equally, I began to think, well, it'd be nice to have another opportunity to work overseas if I could. And that's actually when I started to develop sleep problems during that period. So that's sort of that.
What period was this again?
2002.
2002?
I was, about in my just mid-late 30s, and I was engaged, and I had a situation in our organisation where we were reorganising because of changes. Basically, Shell bought a huge business in the US called Lubrizol for $4 billion, and that led to a huge change and reorganisation to integrate that business and give that product area more focus. So our whole department of 20-odd people had to reapply for our jobs. Wow. They just threw the balls up in the air, as it were, and started to change things around and say, you've got to reapply. And it's a time of great stress. I think all but one of us got a very similar job at the end. I was recently engaged, and my then fiancée didn't really understand what was going on, was very stressed by it, understandably, completely understandably. I was quite stressed by it.
Because of the level of uncertainty?
Yeah, level of uncertainty. And when you're getting married and making plans and all the rest of it, it's quite, it took her by surprise, took me by surprise as well. And that actually triggered the start of my sleep issues, the anxiety around that. Because normally most people have sleep problems, can trace it back to if they really think about it, often find there was a trigger event or there was something particularly that happened, and from that day on they started to think they found it more difficult to sleep, and that was mine. Okay,
awesome. We're going to get into sleeping stuff in a bit. So then what happened then? So you reapplied for your job, you got it, or got a similar type of job?
Another couple of years doing that, yeah.
Okay, for Shell still?
Yeah, that's for Shell, and then I had 6 months doing a project for them in China. We recruited 200 new salespeople, because everything's, China, it's all about scale.
Was the sleep problem still happening?
It was gradually getting worse, but that was not. I would say it didn't start to really get worse till. It was getting worse, but in a way that I can only realise it got worse looking back on it. So in terms of a curve, it was very gradual, and then towards the end of that decade, it began to get really bad. I think also, obviously, I was doing a global job just before I went to China, so I travelled quite a lot, and that began to sort of contribute. Then I went to Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, which is a Pacific island area famous for diving and volcanoes and all that sort of stuff. I then became the general manager of the business there, and that was quite stressful. So I think it began to get worse. And then also Elliot was born, which is a joyful event. My son, who's just sat in the corner of the room as we're doing this recording. However, obviously then you start to have the usual thing with a baby and all that sort of stuff. So that began to add to that. I think.
So when did you leave Shell?
I did one more job after that in London, and I left Shell in 2008.
You worked yourself into particular roles when you had a set goal, like a set target, a set project. So it wasn't just a case of turning up to the office every day and going through the ups and downs of life, what a lot of people do. You actually you had business projects, you had
very clear goals. And especially when working overseas, you've then got all the political uncertainty and the uncertainty of just working in places where there are riots or shootings or famine or floods or all these sorts of stuff as well. So a lot of the countries I worked in, because I worked mostly in developing areas, you had all that as well, which added to the stress, but actually made the job more interesting, because you just don't quite know what's going to happen tomorrow, if you know.
So what advice would you give somebody looking to kind of climb up through the corporate ladder? So taking it away, I pride this kind of podcast on a wide mix of things. I don't just want to talk about your book, but you've become really successful working for a big corporation. So how did you build your way up in the company to being near the top, essentially? Because a lot of people just feel there's either a bottleneck, there's no opportunity, and in some cases that might be true. But then also a lot of the times people just get stuck. What advice would you give somebody to continue to progress within their lives and just in their job particularly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first thing is to get a sense of what your own purpose is, these days. And I think if I look back on it, I maybe implicitly I had a sense that I like to make a difference to others and enjoy what I'm doing, and have a smile on my face when I'm doing it, and inspiring others, bringing zest to people's lives is very important to me. So the sort of, whether it be a customer or someone that works for me and so forth, that was very important. So having a sense of what your purpose, and being very honest about that, and then saying, okay, do you think that fits with the organisation, the company, what their aims and goals
intentions are?
Exactly. Or doesn't it? And if it doesn't, well, do yourself a favour and do them a favour and look for something else. So the first thing is to try and see if you think you're aligned in terms of bigger picture and goals for the organisation. I think one of the great things about this generation, people coming into the workforce now, they're much more concerned about purpose, the environment, the goals of the company, and that sort of thing than probably we were 20, 30 years ago. So I think that's great. Having done that, I think get yourself a few mentors around, get some good relationships with people who are a bit older than you, maybe 5-10 years or even further down the track in the organisation. Not just because they're the sort of people who might look out for jobs for you in the future, but they'll give you good advice. Because the world of work is so different to being a student and so forth. I think the last thing is also just trust yourself. I probably could have made even quicker progress in Shell if I'd been a little bit more confident in my earlier years. I think, when you're 22 or 23 and you go and work for a large corporate, you suddenly find yourself in a meeting with people who are all older than you and more experienced than you. And you've got to find a way to make sure your voice is heard. And that's not necessarily to just be loud and silly and obnoxious. It's just do your homework before you go in and make sure that if you've got a point to make, you make sure you make it politely. And I think at times I was probably a bit nervous around that in my early years. Not now, but I was in my early days. So if I had advice to someone now, I'd say, if I was mentoring someone, in that situation, I'd say, prepare for those situations properly and know what you want to say, because the voice of the 25-year-old or 20-year-old is incredibly valuable in a room of people, especially if you're talking about customers and clients. You're representing that group.
Yeah, because let's be honest, right? A lot of people do talk about money. They talk about it's the world of entrepreneurship, and people think, especially with social media, there's a fast track to becoming successful or becoming rich. And the misconception what people have, I think, is the fact the only way you can do that, essentially, especially with the younger generation I'm talking about, is you have to have your own business or you have to be on TV, and it's like a quick get-rich-quick scheme. But I don't know how accurate the statistic is, but I heard it the other day actually on a different podcast, and they said something like 4 out of 5 millionaires actually work for somebody else. And that's kind of a lesson I'm trying to push into people, is actually, do you know what? It's hard working for yourself. You don't have to just work for yourself. There's so many different opportunities out there for companies like Shell, for other big corporations, but you have to want to go and get it. Why invent the wheel, essentially, when the blueprint's already been made? Sometimes, for example, me, I've been self-employed for 6-7 years, and the first 5-6 years, even now, is still really, really difficult. And sometimes I think we had this conversation, I wouldn't wish the challenges on, say, sometimes my worst enemy. But I'm the type of person who can stay consistent and carry on pushing forward, because I know eventually it will pay off. But I think why I'm fascinated by you is because you've been through that. You've been through that whole experience. You've been out in the private world, and you've traveled the whole world, and you've got so much experience. And that's what I think what makes your book so much more powerful, is because you've actually lived it and you've gone through it and you've experienced it literally your whole life. You know what good sleep is, bad sleep is, you know how it's affected you, what's triggered it, and it can literally come from anywhere. But sorry, that's just me rambling on, I guess. But when did you leave Shell?
I left Shell in 2008. And I would have worked for a company called McKinsey, which is a big strategic consultancy, global consultancy. Worked for them for a couple of years. Okay. And that was pretty bad for my sleep, to be honest. I mean, McKinsey is legendary for its long hours and for pressure of turnaround. Okay. High quality people, very motivated, great sense of purpose, very client focused. I do think it's a great organisation and produces fantastic work for clients. I think it comes as a bit of a cost, though, for many people, in terms of long hours cultures and so forth, especially if you say the people you're working with are more late night people. I was very much an early morning person. Okay. If you're working with someone who's still expecting you to finish off a slide or doing it one and 2 in the morning, it's tough if you're not that sort of person.
Do you believe is there such thing as a morning person and an evening person?
Certainly the research that I've come across, and certainly my personal experience in life, is that it's actually that it's sort of genetic determined almost, that some of us are more morning people and some are more evening, nighttime people, and it's good to get to know what you are. And I'm
a morning person.
Over the years, I've discovered I'm a morning person, and it works well for me. But again, I think that's something people increasingly need to be honest about when they're working in teams or whatever, because some of us are just better at cracking on with a problem in the morning. And if you gave me a problem at 10 o'clock at night, and I say, look, Cameron, I'll sleep on it. And if you want something by 9 in the morning, I'll get up early and I'll spend an hour on it or 2 hours on it, and I'll be far better for it. So everyone needs to understand that. So I think it's definitely a thing.
So how long did you work for McKinsey? Is it McKinsey? Yeah, a couple of years. And then when did you take the? Oh, really? Wow. So when did you take the leap to do coaching, consultation?
I then went to work for a company called Coates, which makes thread and zips. And again, I was running a business in Sri Lanka then.
Wow, it's just well travelled.
And while I was in Sri Lanka, I began to think that I wanted to have a different sort of life. I didn't necessarily want to keep travelling. I wanted to live in one place for a number of years. And the areas of coaching and consulting had always interested me. And I found out about a course in INSEAD in Singapore, which is a big business school, global business school based in France. They've got a branch in Singapore and one in the Middle East. And found out about this master's that you could do, and managed to get my company to sponsor me to do it. And that was in 2013. And I did that for a couple of years. And as part of that, I had to do a thesis about something I really wanted to change. And that could be in my organisation, it could be anything, but something you felt passionately about changing. And I wrote mine about my sleep, which kind of was the basis of the book. Was the basis of the book.
Okay. So how long you been living back in the UK now?
Came back to live 2014 in August, actually, so almost exactly 5 years.
5 years. And since then, was you working for anybody else?
Yeah, I did another role with Coates for about 18 months, and since then I've been freelancing, working a bit on this work, and then ultimately writing the book. I also run a peer group for CEOs of small and medium-sized businesses.
So how have you found a transition from not just working for a corporation every single day to then freelancing, doing your own thing, the flexibility, the freedom? How was that difference to, say, the last 20 years of your life doing what you've been doing?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, Cameron, is identity. The first year, when people say, what do you do? I said, I used to work for McKinsey. I used to work for Shell. I didn't feel like I'd established my own identity in the new work because I was still working out what I needed to do. That first year I did a few interviews. I thought, do I want to go back to the corporate world? I knew the content of the work, but not the structure. And then when I managed to get my own new identity, which is as an author and as a coach and consultant and these things, then I felt much more comfortable. So it wasn't so much the discipline around it was the identity aspect.
Do you think that identity was also driven by, not saying you have it, but I think we all have it, but like ego and pride as well? So for example, you can flex your chest a little bit and say, I did this as Shell, or I did that. So then you get a level of respect from people. But if they ask you a question, what do you do? And you say, not a lot, they're going to be like, who's this?
Exactly. There's that famous, is it the film About a Boy with Hugh Grant, isn't it? He sits next to someone and they say, what do you do? And he says, nothing. And they look at him and say, you can't do nothing. And he says, yeah, I can't exactly quoting from the film, but it's along those lines. Very much the same. I think for me, especially being a general manager or CEO of a business overseas where you were the boss in this country.
That's what you've done
That's what I did 3 or 4 times. When you were in that role, you were Mr. Shell in that country, whatever. You ended up talking to politicians, and I met Prince Giles, and God knows what. You were the face of an organisation in a country, doing various things, which frankly were fun. To be in that position to represent. I found that very, very.
Was it scary to let that go?
I was very ready. I thought about it for a long time. Because
you are on this pedestal in a way. You are the man. And everybody under you knows you. As you said, you know everybody. Your network is just grown and it is huge. And to let that go, I bet it's quite scary in a way. Or no, I don't know.
I think the scary thing was more, as I said, about establishing the new identity. I was ready to let the old one go. I think that would be the fairest way to put it. Okay. I was ready to say, look, I think I increasingly understood that the fact I got a chance to meet royalty was a function of the position I was doing. It wasn't about me. It was about the fact I was the managing director of that business for a 4-year period, and it's like something you're given, and all the perks that come with it you're given, which is great, and you play that role to the best of it, but it's not me. There's a wonderful story by a speaker called Ryan Avery, who talks about he calls it the polystyrene cup syndrome. He'd done a corporate role where he'd gone to see a particular client. He was a senior guy, got off the plane, chauffeur driven off the plane, straight, to the VIP suite or whatever at the organisation. He went back to see them a year later as an independent operator and speaker and consultant. He got off the other end of the plane. He took the bus to the terminal. He queued for passport. He then got on the bus to go to the place. And instead of the China cup, they presented him with a plastic cup for the cup of tea. And he calls it the polystyrene. He said, we're all basically polystyrene cup people. It's just we may go through periods in our lives when we're given a certain different level of treatment because of the role we're doing. And I think but I probably wouldn't have known that when I was 30, but by the time
How old are you, by the way?
I'm 55 next month.
55 next month. So let's not get this confused as well. So we're talking about identity. We're talking about the transition and the roles you was in. There is no question the roles you were in would have paid very, very well. So then also that security of that salary, that must also be quite scary.
Yeah, that's scary. I mean, I was fortunate. I did have a good cushion. So I had reasonable lifestyle, but I also managed to.
So you were smart. You built something. Yeah.
So I was in a reasonable position to do it. So that helped. I think if for some people they find financial insecurity drives them.
Financial insecurity.
Lack of a regular income drives them. I think for me it would probably be the opposite. It was more like it would have scared. If I hadn't felt I had a cushion to draw on, it would have scared me. Okay. Probably almost like up into a sort of state of paralysis or something like that. So it just depends on your attitude to money on that, and that's quite important to know.
And your behaviour in general, I think. Yeah.
But I think it's quite important to know that before you take a leap out of the corporate world. Some people it would freak them out, so they shouldn't do it.
They shouldn't do it. And that's not a bad thing either.
No, otherwise we wouldn't have anybody to run the large organisations, would we? So,
that's true. So then you got into coaching and stuff like that. How was that whole transition as far as when you got your first client? Was it quite exciting? Was you just focused on... Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think early on in that, I said that sort of the first year was all about deciding what my new purpose was and my new persona was, as it were, and my new portfolio. And it took around a year. And when I actually then landed on it and started to work with different clients, it was extremely exciting. And I think it's almost like the first few clients I had as a salesman in the 80s. It's as exciting as that, except of course that you've got greater wisdom, that you have some sense of a bit more patience, a bit more understanding of what's going on dynamically in the behaviour and the interaction with people. And I think I've just tried to remain client focused and hope that I over-deliver in the work I do with people. But obviously when you're coaching someone, a lot of it's around the quality of the questions that you can answer and how you can draw out from the individual or the group, if you're doing group coaching, what it is they want to do. And I think that's the interesting thing for me. Just it's always emerging. It's never the same. It's always different. So yeah, I think it probably, as I said, it took me about a year to get comfortable with the new
you and identity and stuff like that. So you've had this book idea, Positive Sleep, for a little while, but how long did it take you to... So this book, we're probably actually going to, when we launch this podcast, it's probably already going to be out. So Positive Sleep, where can they buy the book?
You can buy it online at Amazon, both hard copy and Kindle.
Okay.
And Some bookshops will be stocking it as well. I know certain bookstops near me will be stocking it and so forth. So you can order it through a bookstop. And also LID, which is the publisher, they have their own website. You can order it from there. So there's different
ones. So guys, do check it out. But how long did it take you? So this is going to be like a September
September the 5th. It comes out next Thursday.
Exciting?
Yeah, very exciting. Yeah, I'm a bit, yeah.
Of course you are. We'll get into that. So how long did it take you to write this book, Giles?
Right. I began writing the thesis that forms the basis of the book 5 years ago.
Wow.
Right? And it took me like about a third of the class I was in. I think we were one of the worst ever in terms of delivering our theses on time. You meant to write the thesis in about 7 or 8 months. And most of it, it was part of a group of 36 writing different theses about different subjects, different sorts of transitions that people were going through. And I think about 12 of us didn't hit the deadline and got a bit of extra time to do it. Often because we were writing about deeply personal transitions that we were going through. And in my case, that was true.
So why did you do it as part of a group? Is that accountability? Is it?
At INSEAD, you all did this course, and to get a master's degree, you all had to do a thesis. It was part of the qualification for getting the master's, and you chose different subjects. So, for example, one of my peers, Mark Davis, he did a fantastic thesis all about the impact of sleep on traders. He worked for a couple of major merchant banks, and he noticed that when people were sleep deprived, they were making big mistakes, and those mistakes were costing millions, literally millions of pounds. So he did some research around that and very interesting. So everyone did their own. He and I did sleep. Everyone else did other things. Okay, we're the only two that did sleep. And some of us, like me, took an extra month or so extra year actually, to finish it off. So I would have submitted the thesis at the end of 2016, possibly early 2017, and then got marked and passed and got the degree and so forth. Yeah. And that then set me on a journey of doing talks. It's a great thing to talk to people about sleep. It's a wonderful icebreaker. Yeah. If you say to someone, what do you do? So I've just written a book about sleep. Almost nobody says, and what else do you do? Or moves on. They say, oh, that's really interesting. Tell me a bit more about that. It's a good conversation that people often don't talk about, a subject people don't talk about. So I started doing talks and workshops, and just really for fun. And then the first one I ever did actually was to the business group in Sri Lanka that I used to be on the board of. So I'd left Sri Lanka and I'd gone back. And then I got asked by other business groups, and then I started running my own peer group. I did a talk for the peer group. Other peer groups heard about it and said, can you do something for us, and so forth. So it was just really a series, mostly business people, because I'm a business person. I've written that from I guess it's a story of a business leader who's had sleep issues. So I've typically talked to that sort of market because that's the one that has shown an interest. Yeah. But it's applicable to anyone from sort of my son's age group upwards, really. It starts to have sleep challenges when they're doing exams and so forth.
So then when did you send the final edited version in? Or when did your editors check it, send it back to you, and then you was like, yes?
Yes, actually it was end of June.
This year?
End of June this year. Oh. So in terms of the actual book, because then that was the sleep, there was the thesis, then the talks, and then, as I say, about August last year, inspired by, I must give a name check to my friend Ben Renshaw, who was one of my first coaches 20 years ago.
And Ben is the author of Purpose, Lead. I read his book actually, Purpose. Really good book. Really good book.
Ben is someone I've known a long time.
Good friend of yours?
Good friend of mine. And I'll mention it to him. Yeah. And Ben met me about a year ago, and we were talking about all this stuff. Okay. And he encouraged me to talk to LID and said, there's definitely a book in this, Giles. And I sort of thought maybe there was, but hadn't really pushed it. And that's how it came about. So
yeah, I've literally just read his book as well as yours, because Lyd actually sent it to me. Okay. And one thing what I like about your book and his book is that there's a huge amount of value in it. So, for example, you got a lot of personal development books out there which is just full of crap, I guess, or they tell you what to do, but they never really tell you how you can do it. And that's one thing I've kind of liked about his book. But yeah, so let's dive into it a little bit. One thing I'm blown away by, but you can talk about identity, and obviously Giles must be building his identity now, and very well respected, because the people who gave you praises on the book is pretty phenomenal.
Very fortunate.
So how did that happen? Did you send them a hard copy out, or do you send them like...
No, I sent them a soft copy because we needed to get the advance praise to put on the book, and it's everybody who's given me advance praise is someone I have had a personal connection with at some point. I've worked with, or they've been a peer. Some people I've known there 30 or 40 years. Even a couple of guys at university with me who we've had parallel careers and doing different things. And I asked them if they'd be good enough to read the chapters and give me some feedback. And I was really surprised by the generosity of people. I shouldn't really say that in the sense that they're my friends and all.
No, but you deserve it. Of course you deserve it.
I was, pleased by the...
Awesome. So I want to go through some of the parts, and if you can just explain kind of what's in the book and also your take on it in a different way, that would be kind of great. We've also kind of touched on already your interest in the topic. Let's talk a little bit about triggering sleep. When you talk about, as you said, the stress triggered a lot of different things for you, and sleep anxiety. Is that common? How often does that happen? Because from my perspective, right, whether it's good or not, I've read quite a few different books about sleep, and it talks a little bit about caffeine, sunlight, loads of different stuff. But me personally, well, I've got a newborn baby, as you know, so that sleep kind of goes out the window a little bit. Definitely a challenge. But why I ask that is because when I get in bed at night, I'm out cold. Yeah. I don't know whether it's because I'm sleep deprived, exhausted. But then I'm out cold, and then when I wake up, most of the time I don't struggle to get out of bed. Yeah. I'm just ready to get. Most of the time the baby will get me up, or I'm just out and I'm going again. What problems have you seen? Basically, because I don't know, what problems have you seen, not just within yourself, your friends, people within the corporate world? What big challenges do people face?
It's normally in the areas of, as you say, a career issue. So, for example, they think they're going to lose their job, or they're going through a very difficult time in the career, or health. Their health or the health of somebody else's, or a cocktail of things that come together. In my case, for example, the anxiety about the job definitely triggered it, and being in that new situation of wanting to get married and building a family, etc. But then a whole bunch of other things happen on top of that. So then I changed job, and I end up in China, which is quite stressful. And then I go to Papua New Guinea, and just before that, my mother dies. And so there's a whole bunch of things like that. And then Elliot's born, as you say, newborn baby. So.
Was it hard balancing all of that? Sorry, was it like... Yeah, it is. Like family, obviously we've got Elliot here now. I bet the level of stress to be working so high in a company, wife, kid, I bet that was difficult.
That was difficult. I mean, particularly in somewhere like Papua New Guinea, if anyone looks it up if they don't know where it is, it's a beautiful place, but it's known for being quite violent.
I've seen it on Ross Kemp. Ross Kemp did a gang thing or something on it.
Yeah. Quite violent. So, for example, you'd get lots of shortages of things. And if you've got a shortage of something, and then there's a political issue or a security issue, for example, if none of the planes in the country, we were the sole supplier of aviation fuel in the country, which is a very dangerous position to be in, really. It was great. It was a good business that you had the market, but the downside was if something went wrong with the fuel that you were delivering, and they ran out of stocks, no planes would fly. And you would be held accountable, as it were. You'd be the front page of the newspaper, and it'd be your neck on the block. So when you got phone calls in the middle of the night about things like that, it did happen. Yeah, no, we never ran out. Unfortunately, we had some difficult situations, but we air freighted stuff in, and we made sure we covered it. But you'd get into situations that were quite stressful. That would not help. So I think, as I said, when you talk about, for most people, there might be one triggering event like I had, but then it's a cocktail of other things that then add to it that mean this issue can go on for a long time. And there's a great quote, I think, by Tanya Kevlin, one of my peers from Shell, who writes quite movingly in the advanced praise. It's just towards the end of the advanced praise section about why she thinks sleep is such an important for busy executives. I think it's the last quote at the bottom there. And the bottom of that page. I'm not so much to read from it. It's just to say that when I asked Tanya for the quote, and I only asked her for 3 or 4 lines, one of the reasons why she wrote half a page is she had her first experience this year of having sleep challenges after many years of sleeping really well and being able to sleep well. And to her, it was a cocktail of different pressures of different types.
Sleep is readily sacrificed to keep ahead of their relentless workloads, limiting perspective and impairing sound judgment. A vicious cycle quickly kicks in. And then obviously she talks a little bit about you. She talks about being in the corporate and talking about obviously the sacrifices that are being made.
But she just said it was a great conversation we had. That she basically said, she'd found it something that she hadn't suffered from till this year, really. So
she says, I believe the leaders who make the greatest impact are those who consciously create time, space and energy to master the art of managing the immediate pressures of now whilst imagining and building the new. Well, that's powerful. And this cannot be done without good health and good rest. Great leaders know this and work deliberately hard at achieving it. She says great leaders know this. How many actually put it into action?
I think...
Can't put a percentage on it, but from your experience...
Well, I think, firstly, how many great leaders are there out there? There are a lot of leaders out there, but then saying someone's a great leader is quite a big label, I think. And then within that, then I think it's increasingly becoming understood, though, let's be honest, Cameron. The whole concept of regeneration and the need to regenerate yourself and refresh yourself, it's certainly in the sporting world. Now it's part of the training regime for anybody, is they've got to properly renew, regenerate sleep, and programming sleep in for sports people is now a huge thing. So I think but 20, 30 years ago, not really. For most people, it wasn't.
What are the impacts of having bad sleep?
Just about everything, really. You
said there's been business deals where people have literally lost millions of pounds, dollars, just because they made a poor decision, because their well-being wasn't high, they didn't look after themselves, nutrition, sleep, they wasn't present, so they made bad decisions. Is that quite common?
Yeah, I think it's very common. I think that, there's a famous, I don't think I put it in the book, but there's a famous expression, I think Bill Clinton is quoted as saying, every bad decision I ever made was because I hadn't slept enough, something along those lines. And so the effects of bad sleep move into different areas. Firstly, the health effects. Just about every single health issue you can have, whether it be something as radical as Alzheimer's through to other things like even obesity, for example, can be clearly linked to sleep as part of the issue. Good sleep will contribute to a better situation in those particular parameters, as it were. But in terms of business and in terms of leadership, particularly leadership at a school or any organisation, some of the things that are affected are, firstly, your ability to just think clearly. We all know if we haven't had a good night's sleep, we wake up feeling a bit groggy, a bit fuzzy. Your just ability to think through things and get the inspiration and get those things that just suddenly spark up and say, let's try that. Your ability to generate options and problem solve, radically affected by sleep, poor sleep. Another is your ability or your willingness to listen to other people's opinions. If you're leading a team, if you're leading a football team or you're Ian Morgan leading the World Cup final team in the cricket and the sport I love, or you're the headmaster at a school or you're running a business, and you're so tired, often you just get very, very focused on trying to just get through the day and get stuff done. Sure. You're not really as interested in the slightly crazy left field suggestions that might come up from someone, which might be the way to solve that problem, or it might be worth a try. You get very close down. So this is just 2 examples, sort of general problem solving, but also, your willingness to take on suggestions from others that are radically affected by sleep.
What about things like we eat and stuff like that, and like caffeine? Is that a big element of sleep deprivation and struggling to sleep?
What caffeine does is it just blanks out one of the hormones that helps to sort of put us to sleep. I think it's called androgen. From the moment we wake up, this particular enzyme is not hormone, it's an enzyme, gets generated through your system, and gradually that, along with your circadian clock, those two things come together and help determine when you go to sleep and when you wake up. Okay. When you use caffeine, it's almost like you're throwing a blanket over that stuff. You're just damping down the effects of that enzyme. It's not going anywhere, but you're just hiding it. But also, caffeine has a half-life of 6 hours. Now, I remember from my O-level chemistry, what does that mean? That means that if you've got 10 grams of caffeine in your body at 12 o'clock because you've just had a cup of coffee, 5 grams of that will still be in the system at 6 p.m, and 2.5 grams of it will be in your system at midnight. So the more cups of coffee you have, or tea as well, it's black tea and green tea, there's a lot of caffeine in that, and even some of the energy drinks like Iron Brew and other these sort of things, other energy drinks have that in. The more you have, especially later in the day, it takes time for those things to process, and the older we get, apparently the harder it is to process caffeine in our system.
Because caffeine's a big one, and
it does affect you. So personally, I really, when I was addressing my sleep issues 4 years ago and really struggling with sleep, I was working with someone I mentioned in the book, and I took a decision to just give up, encouraged by her to give up caffeine for a month, just to see what it would do. And I could feel the benefits, so I thought I'll just go another month and another month. And that was June 2014, haven't had a cup of coffee since. 2015, 4 years. Never drank black tea anyway, so I haven't really knowingly taken much caffeine in. And there is a bit of caffeine in chocolate and so forth, so I haven't taken much caffeine in for 4 years now. I'm not anti-coffee, by the way. I think coffee is a wonderful thing. I love the smell of coffee. I even still have a coffee machine at home. If you came to my flat, Cameron, the first thing I'd do is offer you a cup of coffee. So I'm not anti-coffee. I just think that with caffeine, it's such a strong drug that acceptable.
What did you say? Such a strong
drug, actually.
See, I was going to ask you. I think it's a drug.
Yeah, such a strong drug, but it's an acceptable drug in our society, which is, it's fine. It just needs to be. People need to be conscious of the fact that.
But they're not. They're not. They become reliant on it. So people believe as well that they cannot operate in the day if they don't start with a coffee, which is unreal, because what happens is obviously when you sleep, your body naturally dehydrates because you haven't drunk anything for 6, 7, 8 hours. And then the first thing you're putting straight into your system is this high-paced caffeine. Is going straight to your blood. So you're asking for one of the biggest crashes of your day.
Yeah, well, I think that certainly the main thing is that if you are going to have coffee, try to drink it as early as possible.
And like a performance element.
And most people, that's an element of them taking that. I think more and more people are becoming conscious of not having a cup of coffee after, say, midday or 2 p.m. at the latest because of this half-life sink that I mentioned. And then it's really about how many that you have in the day. I was a sort of 6 or 7 espressos a morning man, so I was in a bad.
How was the downfall coming?
5 days of severe, migraine headaches, not just headaches, but like debilitating headaches. So having gone through that, then I thought I'm only going to take it up again if I really need to. And
it's a one-off type of thing, or I got a meeting or a couple meetings,
and I. I could have gone back, in theory, and saying, right, I'm just going to have an espresso on a Saturday and a Sunday or something like that. But I thought if I start, with 1 or 2, will I be able to keep.
Wow, but that's what makes it crazy, because it happened recently. I don't like coffee, but I got in a habit of drinking energy drinks. But the ones with all the crap in it and stuff like that, and then coming down from it, massive headaches, feeling drained, feeling exhausted, and that also kind of it makes you think, if it's doing that to my body, something can't be quite right. Now, I'm not against caffeine. I feel like if we become reliant on it, then I am against it a little bit. But like if you use it for performance purposes, I completely understand it, I get it, but a lot of people just use it and abuse it, and obviously it's just not healthy. Everything's in moderation.
You should be using it as a way to mask something else. It's a stimulant, a bit like people talk about to me a lot about alcohol and sleeping, and they say, well, it helps me sleep. And I say, well, actually, it's not helping you sleep. Alcohol is a sedative. It helps you feel drowsy, but it's not encouraging good sleep. Just in the same way that what caffeine is, it's a stimulant that's halting that sort of gradual sleeping process, and hence everything in moderation, as you say. If you, I love it when people say to me, "Well, I just have a cup of coffee in the morning. That's enough for me." Well, that's great. You're able to enjoy coffee in a great way, in a way that's not going to affect your sleep for the rest, that night. I wasn't in that place, and I wasn't sure I could get to that level, so I just said, I'm not going to have any more. But I had an espresso machine by my desk in my office, so that's how I made my own espresso. So and I'd invite people in for a meeting around the desk, around the round table in the corner, and people loved it because I was always serving coffees to people. So come meet the boss, he'll give you a cup of coffee and have a meeting. But that's how bad the habit was for me. So
I don't want to give too much away about sleep because I think people need to read this book. But one thing I'm fascinated about, because I want to be an author one day, how is it when this book came to you for the first time? Because I was really impressed with how it looked, how it felt. The typography, is that the word? Typography? I think so. Everything all about it, the look, the feel, the inside, the creation, the design, everything's pretty good.
Yeah, no, they did a great job. LID, fantastic. So yes, it felt... It felt great. Well, actually, it was in two stages, because the first stage is we designed that cover around Christmas time, and I'm glad Elliot's here because he helped me design the cover. LID, I should say that there are a number of books in the positive series. There's one about nutrition, and there's also one about male mental health. So the books are called Positive Something. So they came up with that title, and that goes with that. They have a certain design, which is a plus sign, a variation on that. So some of it was already, as it were, there, which I rather liked, and then it was about me helping to choose which cover and which colour. And for me, one of the key decisions was to use turquoise. I love the colour turquoise, but also it's a very soothing, calm, sort of spiritual colour, I think. Ideal for a sleep book. Yeah. And so then they did the design that took that colour the whole way through, which I really liked. So we actually designed the cover around Christmas time. So I think early January, I got the mock-up of what it would look like. So that was a thrill. Obviously, the book hadn't been finished then, but I just knew what the cover would be like.
Did it give you that sense of push to get it wrapped up?
Absolutely. And then sort of end of July, early August, I actually got a copy of the book, and that was a big wow moment. And I was also very fortunate. Someone I know called Alistair Bullen, he was kind enough to do a few illustrations for the inside that also made it a bit different. We went to the cricket last year. One of my great passions, went to Lord's to watch England versus India. It rained all day. We didn't see a ball bowled. So while we're at the cricket, we're chatting about, as you can imagine, when you're under an umbrella waiting for something to happen that doesn't happen. We talked about all sorts of stuff, including the fact I was doing this book. And he said, I'd love to do the illustrations for you. Wow. So that's how that came about. So all those things came together to come up with something that's hopefully appealing to people.
Did you experience much resistance, internal resistance of putting it out, questioning yourself, doubting yourself, and not this 98% of it is done, now it's the final 2%?
No, the difficulty for me was more initially. I'd got a thesis that I'd written, an academic document, which was about less than half the length of that book. And the editor that I worked with, Sarah, she read it and said, this is great, this is the basis of a book, that's fine. If she'd emphasised how much I had to change, I did end up changing quite a lot, then I probably wouldn't have been motivated. But because she was encouraging and said, actually, unlike most people who just come in with an idea for a book and maybe the first chapter, you've got quite a lot already written. Because she was so encouraging, that really helped me get going. And then it's about discipline, and some days, and inspiration. It's a combination of the two. Some days I got loads done. I'd write 1,000 words. Other days I kept a log. And I'd lucky if I wrote 100. And I'd think, did I even write a good 100? And I've talked to people a lot about writing books in the last year, having written one in the process, and obviously some subject that you're now interested in because you're in that process yourself. and everybody's got to find you've got to find your own way of doing it. But if you're a morning person like I am and you are, you'll probably find that I basically said, if I haven't written it by noon, I'm not going to write it. Okay. So I did all my writing in the morning, and I'd maybe reread it in the evening or review it, but I'd never wrote in the evening. I only wrote in the morning because that was my most focused time.
Awesome. So what's next?
Launching the book, a number of events. I'm really keen to run workshops and speak to people on the subject, because I guess to some extent I'm on a bit of a mission, and my mission is really around helping leaders, especially of any sort of organisation, understand the importance of sleep, how good sleep will help them in their lives and their performance, and also the example they'll set for others. I mean, you work a lot with kids at school. If they can get that sense from the teachers and from other people around them, the importance of it, it's a good thing to sleep, and it's a good thing it's part of our, whether it be the occasional nap, which I talk about a lot in there, the power of the nap. The well-timed nap is a good thing as well if you're short of sleep and you've got youngsters around. That's part of it. And also working particularly with my peer group that I work with, the other people I work with in terms of coaching them and so forth as well. But I think for me, there's a long way to go on this sleep journey as a country and in other countries as well, and that's now my mission. And I guess what inspires me to do it, Cameron, is that there's some great authors out there on sleep. There's other great books on the subject, but all those people tend to be psychologists or academics and so forth. Very few people. I've probably only read one other, have written about the subject from sort of personal experience as a business leader and so forth. So that's where I think I can hopefully build rapport with people, and they say, actually, I was there. What Giles is talking about, that was me last week, or I've fallen asleep in the middle of a dinner, or I've got up at 3 a.m. and thought it was a good time to work, or I've been crazily trying to get naps throughout the day and exhausted in meetings and fell asleep, and all that sort of stuff, all the stuff I write about. I hope that will really connect with people.
And it will. And I think I spoke to you when we first ever met about also the power of kind of social media and your influence on there as well. And I think you're starting to use the most of that, and it's time to really push that forward, because you can offer value not just through a book, but through posting and continuing to share your story and your experiences. But I ask everybody this, every single one of my guests, and I put them on the spot. I say, if you could sit down with any 3 people, famous people, dead or alive, what 3 people would it be?
That's a great question. I think one would have to be Sir Don Bradman, because I'm a big cricket fan and he was the greatest batsman ever. So I'd love to know a bit more about what made him tick, what made him so... I mean, his batting average is nearly double what anyone else is ever, so that would be one. No, he was a good player, but Sir Don would be one. And I've been lucky enough to meet Mike Brearley, so I've met a lot of my cricketing heroes, but John Bradman, died some years ago, so he would be one. I think I would definitely like to have met a Beatle. Any Beatle would do, really. Possibly George, because I think he was probably the, I don't know, any Beatle. Just because I think not only their creativity, but also what it was like to be a Beatle. That was such a crazy period in the world, and they were seemed to be the most famous people in the world for such a, several periods of time. So probably a Beatle, so a sportsman, a Beatle, and probably a spiritual leader of sorts.
Okay, anyone in particular?
Gosh. Maybe Gandhi. Okay. Someone I know a little bit about, but not a lot.
Awesome. To see if the hype is real?
Just to understand a bit about... just understand him a little bit more about what he did and why he did it and so forth.
So, Giles, I just want to say, obviously from a personal standpoint, a massive thank you for obviously being here today. making this happen. And honestly, a massive congratulations on writing this book, producing it, fighting against all those challenges. Would you like to write any more books?
I keep being asked this, actually, which is a good sign, I think. I'd like to do a second edition of that, actually, in a couple of years, because I'm learning so much about sleep and I'm getting so much more information from people. I think there'll be a second edition at some point, and there may be something else in the future. But this is my main focus at the moment. I've learned if you try and spread yourself too thin, you often fail to achieve stuff. So I would need to give it a bit more focus for now.
Okay, so if I write a book and you read it and you like it, would you do
I'll give you an advance.
Oh yes, look at that.
I've got to read it first.
No, you don't have to. It's fine. Just lie. But guys, honestly, do check this book out. It'll be on Amazon. It'll be on websites. It'll be literally everywhere, all over social media. Plus, we will put this book link actually in the description box below. With that said, Giles, where can people find you? Do you have a website? I know you're on LinkedIn.
Contact me through LinkedIn at the moment.
LinkedIn. Okay, so we will put Giles's LinkedIn also in the description as well. But honestly, thank you. I do appreciate your time. And for everybody at home, make sure that you do comment, like, hit that big red button and subscribe. Also, thanks to Gadget Line for making this possible. And remember, you can either have excuses or you can have results, but you cannot have both. I'm out. So right here with you, go and ask him a question. Brace challenge.